What is the good word? We're going to have another conversation, another great conversation today with Duane Dufault. And yes, I wanted to say Dufault because I come from the Northeast. There's French Canadians there. And so if I say it wrong, Duane, forgive me. But I'm very excited about this conversation coming up because you've got a great sales mind. You're a chief everything officer as well. So we have a lot of commonality. But let's talk about sales and mindset today. What do you think?
I think that's a great place to start because honestly, I feel like that's something that is not talked about enough in the sales industry of things. People always just want to jump to how to close or how to make commission, and then they leap over the thing that's going to ultimately get in their way of success down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your background and we'll find out a little bit about your history and then we'll talk about mindset. But
Yeah.
give us the Reader's Digest, as us old guys say.
Yeah. I miss those things. I did miss them when I used to have to be a paper boy and I deliver them though. So I actually grew up in construction. I grew up in a small town, very northern California, far past the Bay Area, and redneck rodeo town. And I went to school for construction. And as I got into that industry, I started having my family. And I was like, I don't want to be that old contractor guy who's hobbling around and looks like he's 80, but really he's 50 because he can barely getting out of his truck. And that was my dad. And so I made a complete 180 shift in career and went into sales, got my first sales job just over 10 years ago. And ever since then, I've kind of just spent a couple of years inside of different industries and found my way into SaaS. And probably the last half of the decade, 5 or 6 years, has been all in sales leadership. And it's honestly been a really big passion of mine because I felt that when I was younger, or even now, when I get in the presence of a great leader, I feel more empowered and encouraged to do what I thought was possible before, knowing that I've got the, quote unquote safety net of someone who's been through that or can help me through it. And so it's nowadays I really focus on kind of like the topic today of the mindset behind sales and the mental fortitude necessary to get yourself through that, because it's a lot more challenging than people chalk it up to be, especially how social media portrays it. And then helping companies, helping founders, helping sales leaders, get through certain stages of their business and their own career to really get themselves to the next level. So definitely Reader's Digest version. There can be a lot of, I feel like my career is like a Denny's menu, where it's just all these different experiences and stuff. And so there's what's cool is each one of those little experiences have really helped shape my perspective on how I approach things nowadays. So however you want to unpack that, be my guest.
There's so much,
Yeah.
but it's funny. I just put out a post a few days ago on LinkedIn
Mm,
about sales being a grind and how a
yeah.
lot of people refer to it as grind and sales is hard. Man, I used to climb ladders and paint houses that were, 36-foot high ladders, and we would bounce the ladder around, right?
Yeah.
Where I was too young and dumb to know how stupid that was and how, a drop of 36 feet, you can do a lot of damage.
Oh yeah.
I look back at that and say, that was hard.
Yeah.
That was a grind. Speaking to people, having conversations, I don't look at it the same way. How
No,
about you?
there's challenges. Like you have to get past certain things, and I think there's more challenges that come out from lack of skill, preparation, and insecurities from that. But the measurement of what's hard these days is all over the place. Because I was just thinking, as you were talking about the story of the ladder, I was just thinking about things my dad used to tell me to do when I was like 10 years old, helping him on houses, and it was the same stuff, like carrying sheets of roofing material up a ladder to throw on a roof when you could go rent a machine to do that, but that machine was $500 a day. And my dad's like, why would I do that when I have my son who could do that for free? And it's sales is challenging, but I don't think it's hard. If your first exposure to something hard is your first sales job out of college, you're gonna have a hard time because you're gonna run into a lot of, let's call them roadblocks, along the way, and you may not have the mental and emotional endurance and bulletproof vests or thick skin to know that's not hard. There's a lot of other things that are harder than just picking up the phone and dialing and having someone hang up on you. Like,
Yeah. I mean, it all comes down to practice and repetition
yeah.
in pretty much any conversation, right? The more we get comfortable with it. I mean, I was reflecting back on my sales career, and I
Mhm.
started out selling technology back in the mid 90s. And I had just come from the Dominican Republic, and everything about technology, including computers, was completely brand new to me.
Yeah.
And I look back at those early weeks and months, and I was completely lost. But then eventually you settle in, you start to understand things, start having conversations. The first ones are terrible
Yeah.
and they get better. And it's like we all accept, like, if we are going to learn to ride a bicycle or pick up a new sport or something, we don't expect to be great at it. But
Well,
sales, right? I mean, yeah. So I guess the question is, for some reason, people understand how much time they have to put into all of those other things to really be good.
yeah.
But when it comes to sales, they'll say things like, I'm not good at sales. And then they just wing it. Or maybe they occasionally listen to a podcast, or there's a book on their shelf or something. But it
Yeah.
seems like when you got into sales, you went from that construction mindset or construction work,
Yeah.
and then you develop this whole new skill set. And so what was that like for you?
That's funny. I was going to ask you a similar question.
Okay.
When you get two podcast hosts together, it's like, who's going to
Yeah.
ask the question
We'll
next?
save it for the next.
Right. Yeah. We'll save that one. But what's interesting is I don't believe hard work is a skill. That's inherent in all of us. And if you're choosing not to work hard, you're going against human nature. Like, we are literally designed to work hard, go long distances, and do challenging things. It's literally the design of our human body, the size of our leg muscles. Like, oh, we're designed for endurance and hard stuff. So to tell, it's like when I would see things on a resume and under skills, it would say hard work. I almost felt like that was an instant filter. But the transition from manual labor into office work was interesting. I actually fell asleep during my first day. I'm really glad that my first job into kind of the desk world was a part of one of those companies that had a hiring class. I think I was one of 15 or 20, and I was sitting in the back, and the first day I had dozed off, and luckily the guy I got hired with like nudged me, or else who knows what happened. But it quickly came to my observation, we can call it, that I was the only person in that hiring class that came from a manual or labor intensive job. And so I didn't lose energy. I was constantly just ready to go. I didn't need as much breaks. And I was like, oh, if I don't need to get off the phone as much and I can dial the phone more, and then I would just hammer the activity. I would have some of the highest numbers on my team and in the call center at the time for the longest time. And so all I did was just apply what I knew how to do, which was swing a hammer really hard for a long period of time into that job. And then it eventually got to a point where it was like, hey, if you got better at actually talking to people on the phone, you would earn more rather than just, dialing the phone 100 times and blabbering into the microphone. But I think the biggest skill set, I think, or attribute rather, that has stuck with me my entire life is, if you're going to do something, make it worth doing. Like, just because you're answering the phones for a startup, or just because you got laid off from a startup because you finally got into your first leadership role, doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to put that same level of effort into an entry-level support job at this big tech company. It's whatever you're choosing to do. First off, you have to recognize it's your choice to do whatever you're doing today. And when you choose to do that, it's also your choice to not do what's necessary. Like, I've always had this, I don't know where I learned it from. I think it was probably from sport and some of the coaches that I've had, but there's always been a difference for me between what's necessary and doing your best. Like, doing your best is whatever your preconceived knowledge is on whatever is possible. And 99% of the time, we can always go past what we thought was possible, unless you're like David Goggins or something. But the difference between what's best and what's necessary are completely different in my mind, because doing what's necessary means that you're going to do whatever it takes to go and get the job done and achieve it. Whereas people that do your best, they're only doing what they thought was capable before, and they sit there and twiddle their thumbs. And so I always took it where I was like, okay, we have to go and do X amount of calls or go and talk to X amount of people. It's like, okay, what do I need to do in order to make that happen? Well, I didn't get to it during 8 hours because I took, two 15-minute breaks, an hour-long lunch. Well, what's legal in California? Oh, I can do this in a 30-minute lunch. So then I would cut that down. I would do what was necessary within my control to go and get the job done. And that in of itself, I feel like is kind of a missing attribute in a lot of workplaces these days. But I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've kind of had from when I was a kid, playing sports, football, anything. Played year-round sports when I was a kid. That was the only thing to really do other than ride horses. And all the way through high school, college, and into my professional career, and kind of my mindset towards things today, it's, what is necessary to go and hit this goal or do this thing. And then there's always something right after that. That's always interesting to try to chase too. So to answer your question with a long answer, I think that's the biggest thing that sticks with me today that was similar back then.
Yeah. So the do your best line is so open to interpretation now.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was a safe line to use years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that it became an excuse.
Yeah.
Right. Where people would say, as managing a sales team, where someone would say, well, I did my best. And it's like, that's not your best.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it was, I've learned that you have to understand first, right?
Mm-hmm.
What the expectations are, what they think, what the other person thinks, what they should do, and so forth. And then you can ask, well, did you do your best? And that's completely different than, just assuming, like us old school people. I'm sure your dad was one of them. He passed it on to you. And I think my kids are the same way, is that never gets to become an excuse. You don't get to say, well, I did my best. You still have to love me. Right? You still have to keep me here. I did my best. No, It's like, are you able to sleep that you did your best? Right?
Yes.
Can you commit? Did you stay committed to your best self that you did your best? And us old school people would say, like, we always fall short of doing our best. And that's another psychological challenge, but it's, where you're never satisfied.
Well, two things on that. I have the saying that my wife has finally come around to understanding. It's blissfully dissatisfied. It's like, I can be happy, but not satisfied, because I'm always hungry trying to get to the next thing. But there's also the difference in how people look at the word perfect. I have this course out there called the Perfect SaaS Demo. And I get some kickback on that because they're like, oh, perfection, or you're chasing the perfect. I'm like, no. You're looking at it as a noun. It's a verb. It's the art. It's the work you do to perfect your process. And so that's another side of it, where the best versus what's necessary, perfect versus perfect. It's like, if you have that mindset to where you're always working to perfect something, then you're constantly going forward and doing the work to learn how to get to that next level. Like you said, you're always just beyond or just before our best. It's like, as soon as you're done, you instantly know, crap, I could have done that. In the moment, you only knew what you knew, but you don't know what you should have known until you've done what you know. Hopefully that made sense. Like, you don't know you're gonna suck at something until you actually go and try to do it. But then as soon as you're done doing whatever it is, you then know what it took to get to that point, and now you can see where you need to go for the next point. It's just like this never-ending cycle of never technically achieving what your best is, because as soon as you're done doing that, you're like, oh, I need to do that next time. And so it's a constant learning exercise. It's like there's winning, and then there's learning, and the only reason you fail is because you quit. And so you just take whatever the lessons are that you learn from the lack of success in that moment into the next version of when you attempt that thing. It's the same thing with sales, like dial on the phone. You don't fail at sales unless you completely leave the industry and go into marketing or something, right? And I love marketing. I don't want people to,
no offense.
No offense to marketing. I love marketing people. I run marketing teams. So
we have to market ourselves. So
yes. So on that, I legitimately, it's interesting to see solopreneurs like yourself and myself when we get out in the world to sell our services or monetize whatever we're doing. I feel like the ones that do the best right out of the gate are the ones that can market really well, but struggle long term because then they lack the art of being able to influence and sell people. The ones that take a little bit longer to get off the ground and actually start seeing some progress and making money before they go back into a W-2 job are a lot of salespeople, because they don't have the innate ability to understand how marketing works, and they think they're just like, I'm going to go, call people and do discovery calls and sell my services, when you have to be able to market yourself. So it's two sides of the same coin that constantly needs to be, looked at. So I love marketing and I love sales. Like, they're two sides of the same coin. And if I had to choose one of them, I would probably choose neither and just go into product, but different stories.
Yeah. Well, it is fascinating. And I think where, a lot of small businesses and people, in our audience here, you have a lot of people that want to make an impact.
Yeah.
That are trying to, leave a legacy, and they want to do something, right? And so their thing is whatever it is. If they're an author, they're a speaker, they're, trying to serve people, they just want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. But they don't, and myself included, I didn't think about how much marketing would be required. I just figured that I had all of this experience. I just want to help the people that I feel that can make an impact in the world. And then I realized it's like, wow, this is a whole new, this is all, and I learned about, smarketing, right? Sales and marketing together, and all this new terminology, and had to grow my LinkedIn and social media and established a bit of what my brand was. I had to understand what an avatar was. And it's just like, all of this was not a complete new language, but there's a lot of newness to it.
Yes.
And then what gets lost. So I'm coming into this and I have a sales background.
Yeah.
So I can default pretty quickly into sales mode.
Yeah.
Have conversations and know how to follow up with people and ask, just pertinent questions without being offensive.
Mm-hmm.
With people that don't have that.
Yeah.
Right. Where they come in out of the corporate job and they say, I was really good at this and I just want to make a difference now. What advice would you have for them?
Focus on what you just said, which was, what is that difference you want to make? That's going to be the thing that you will always keep you taking that next step forward. In sales, I find it immensely easy, and I don't like using the word easy. It is easy for me to go and figure out how to connect value to someone's product. As long as they built it with a purpose. Like, I can go and develop go-to-market campaigns, talk tracks, demos, scorecards, all these things for someone else's product. But when I go and market myself, it's like you're staring at yourself in the mirror with no filters and no nothing. And you've got to figure out, how do I sell me? Because at the end of the day, if you want to make money and you can only sustain the message if you make the money, you've got to figure out how to have that conversation with other people. And good grief, that's the hardest thing to do. We're talking about the mindset and the insecurities. When you start posting on LinkedIn and social media and ads and a website, and all you're selling is you, it's like nothing's ever good enough. Something's always wrong. And you have the perfectionism or whatever you want to call it. And I think the best advice that I got, and I have it written on a whiteboard over there, it's like, you talking about avatar. I have the avatar of that person I'm selling to, that person I'm creating this thing for. And that's me 5 or 6 years ago. And so it sounds weird, but it's like, I'm constantly having conversations with myself out loud or in my head, but it's all about that version of myself that I was at that point in time, because that's who I know the best. I don't know this other person down the street who's potentially going to look at my ad or my website and buy from me, but I know that There's more people out there that were like me when I was, 27, 26 years old, trying to figure out how to, lead a sales team, how to, do certain things, help go to market, like whatever I was doing at that time. I know me better than anyone else. And so I think this is what happens to me is whenever I get out of that perspective, whenever I think I'm trying to do more or create these big things and campaigns, and I'm going to put all these social posts together and be this cool person, and then I release everything and no one does anything, you're like, oh, I suck. It's like you got out of what you started for. And I think the biggest advice I'd give to anybody, author, course creator, yoga teacher, dirt specialist, whatever, right? Like you just have to remember, like, what is the type of impact that you're wanting to make? Who is the person that you're talking to? And always keep that person in mind. Like I have this person, his name is Steve. Steve is a real person. And he was affected during the first round of big layoffs, the middle of 22. And he came in, I got introduced to him from a friend of mine, and he was an SDR, a sales development representative, for those of you listening, who is basically tasked with the responsibilities to dial the phone and go and qualify, generate leads for account executives, which would then be like the demo and closers in the software world. And he'd been doing it for 2 years, but then he got laid off and he wanted to be an account executive, but he had zero experience doing it. He closed. So what I'm getting at is he is that persona that I keep in mind when I'm creating something, when I'm either writing website copy or I'm putting a course together, or if I'm, coaching a small group of individuals that meet that persona. And I can do that because, one, the emotions that I feel when I'm thinking of Steve are real, because that was also me when I was 22. And so I always come back to that, what you said, avatar or persona, or you can use it as your self version, 10 years ago. But I always come back to that because that's when you have the most emotional connection to what you're doing. If you're just trying to create a marketing campaign to make yourself sound cool, or you're trying to, create some new cover for your book, or putting a thumbnail together for a YouTube video, it's like you're majoring in minor things, because that's not the stuff that people are going to worry about. It's like, who are you serving and how are you serving them? Who are you showing up for that day? It's like, if you can ask yourself better questions, like Tony Robbins says, like to get a better answer, to a better result, ask yourself better questions, which, full circle, that's how true sales is done anyways, it's the art of questioning rather than closing.
So good.
I love this stuff. So
yeah, it just is so good, man. I'm first of all, I'm thinking about me asking somebody probably a year ago, and I said, "Can I be the avatar?"
Yeah,
because the avatar was me, right? Just a little while ago.
Yeah,
I could not get past that. And it's funny that you said that you were your own avatar, from 5 or 6 years ago. And it's just like, I needed to have a conversation with you like a year ago.
This is a conversation I have with myself all the time. Because like when you're in the entrepreneurial space and you're, initially you want to say yes to as many things as possible because you want the exposure, you want the experience, but then you start getting to that point where you start doing things that aren't really aligned with your goal. And as a solopreneur, over 12 to 18 months, like, you should probably say no to 90% of the things that come in, because that just derails you from the focus of launching a new book or putting together a mastermind group for a specific type of people. But it's knowing exactly what that avatar is and how you're connected with that person that fits the avatar, whether it's yourself or it's a loved one. So for example, like I said, I grew up in construction. I went to school for it, construction management, and had some engineering in there too. And I was a project manager, but that's all I knew. My uncle he had a big landscaping company all throughout my childhood. Actually just sold it maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And that avatar of my dad was the person I kept in mind when I would actually work with software companies. So most of the software companies I've worked with have served or been alongside blue collar industries the last decade, when my first job out of construction was with an online retail company that sold construction material. It was like a direct competitor of Home Depot. And so I've always had that avatar, that persona in my mind of like, I'm helping my dad. I'm helping people like my dad get out of their own way, or I'm, and so that was always a story that I would tell myself, because it would emotionally connect me to the process and the outcome I'm helping people achieve. And it would make the excuses I would tell myself irrelevant. All this is hard. I'm tired. I don't feel well, or I whatever the excuse is that I didn't want to pick up the phone. And all of that stuff would go away when I was able to have that emotional connection. And in sales, that's one of my favorite things to do. I have this saying where it's like, if you make a connection, you make a customer. Because if you can legitimately learn about the people you're selling to, have a genuine conversation, you ask them questions, like in your book, you have the chapter where you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And it's all about understanding who you're selling to in order to help them buy. You don't use memorized talk tracks and sleazy closing tactics to get people to buy. It's like, no, you have to understand people on their deepest level and be genuine about your interest in order for them to feel like they're buying rather than getting closed. Like if you do it that way, it should feel like you're gaining a friend, especially when you're a solopreneur and you're selling high ticket items. Like you have to do the work to understand why you're there, and do the work to constantly remind yourself and connect with that avatar, or else you're going to be going in a million different directions. You're going to say yes to, random speaking things. You'll get asked to be a guest writer on all these different blog posts, or you'll just get pulled in these directions. And all of a sudden you're going to look up a few months later and you're like, I haven't even started on the 3rd chapter of the book I was supposed to be writing. Right. So as often as you can, connect back to that reason, that person, that avatar, so you can keep that focus and then have that confidence. Because if you have that focus in the details, then you bring the confidence into the conversation, which is a different part of it, but super necessary.
Yeah. I mean, like you really hit the nail on the head on so much there, but just the topic of saying yes to everything. You feel good because you're busy.
Yeah.
But that busyness can take you away from your core mission stuff.
Yes.
And I was just listening to Brian Tracy. I mean, he's been around for like 100 years. I mean, the guy is still priceless on the stuff he says. And I look at the stuff I do and I said, well, I'm not spending the right time, because it's funny because you also said something about when you look at someone else, you can figure it out in like minutes what's needed. When you look at yourself, it's like, the heck am I doing? Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I was thinking about is when I was standing outside of my body, looking at this old bald guy that knows sales, it's like, that if you had to rep doing all the different things that you're doing, you'd say, focus on what's going to make you money. And so I still periodically have to, not periodically, daily. I need to go back to, okay, what's going to make me money? Is like all of these posts and getting lost in Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. That's, some people do that. And it's like, I could put a post out in the middle of the day. And then if I have notifications on, which I have shut off.
Oh yeah.
Right. Because that becomes a distraction. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you commenting on my post in the middle of the day? That's what I should be asking. Instead, I want to engage.
It's right. It's like this catch-22. Like you're told that you need to be present and active in all these things to help with the algorithms and show people that you're real, but then it becomes this like dark hole you get sucked into. And I honestly believe that social media is a necessary evil. We were able to sell. We sold perfectly fine for 100+ years before it existed. It just maybe speeds things up. If anything, it clouds the market full of charlatans that don't actually do anything. So it's necessary, but you have to have a process for it. So I would get trapped in that too, just because I'm like, ooh, this is cool. It's a good topic. And then it's like, oh, well, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Why am I on this? Like it's necessary to prove social validation that you're real and that you're hitting people on the way that they like to receive messages, rather than only ever having like a crappy website and you just cold call them all the time. Like you have to adjust to the way your buyers like to receive information and like to be sold, first off. But then two, it's got to have a process. Like, you need to either schedule everything out once a week and just let algorithms take their place, and then you do your follow-up as necessary during structured parts of the day. That's the way I do it. And maybe it's not the best thing, but it's also the way I would coach a sales rep. Like your example, I do the same thing. It's like, if I was managing a team right now, or when I was managing a team and they were doing this at 9:30 in the morning during primetime calling hours, what would I say to them?
Right.
It's like, wouldn't be pretty.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And I may have said a couple of those things too in the
Yeah.
past.
some reps, I'll on that note, when it comes to leadership, like, you have to understand your team. Like, those of you that are listening that are in sales management or want to be a sales manager, or in that space where you have that level of influence on a team, like, you have to understand not only what moves the team forward as a unit, as a whole, how do you get everyone rowing in the same direction, but you have to go a level deeper with each person. You have to know what drives them on an individual basis so that you can do that. Like, you should be able to send a Slack message in the middle of the day to one rep that's then going to be different from another rep, but the intentions are going to be the same, but it's worded differently. This person is going to move forward on it. But if you use the same message to someone else, you're going to get offended and call HR. Guilty. Yeah. This guy, I don't know how many times I gotten brought in HR. It's like, this person was offended. I'm like, I'm sorry, they have too many, sensitivity feelings. But it's, on that note, it's knowing your team, knowing your people,
right,
on a deep level. And again, that's like sales. That's why one of the reasons why I love sales, because sales and leadership go hand in hand, because sales and leadership they all involve the art of influence. And so the more you know, the more you understand, the more you can get people to see the light at the end of the tunnel for what they perceive, rather than just thinking you need to get them on your side of the table. And so
oh my goodness,
it's so much fun to get to know people and then really figure out, like, how do they tick, and how do you, what can I do for them that gets them to this point? And it's fun. Like, I don't know, I'm a naturally curious person, but I like to connect with individuals on special levels. Like I know we're going off topic here, but my wife, my wife used to call me the Leslie Knope of gift giving. Like, if you ever saw the anyone on here, the Parks and Rec show, she would give gifts to people that were so unique and special to them that would, like, leave their jaw dropping. And that was always a goal of mine. Like, I always wanted to know someone, especially if they were on my team, to a certain degree, that when they got a gift from me, it was so unique where they would never forget it. And I hold that title strongly, because, like, I know people today that I managed years ago. I got a picture of a coffee mug sent to me just the other day of someone that I had specially made for them like 4 or 5 years ago, that had all these Disney things around it, because she used to work at Disney. And so it's getting to know your people, whether it's a prospect you're selling to or someone that you're managing on one of your teams. It's that curiosity and getting out of your own way, and really looking to serve people rather than manage them or sell them, however you're looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, so it works. Absolutely. I mean, I can't say absolutely the same, but it's so closely related.
Yeah.
Right. Where you can't treat every prospect the same. That's why closing lines do not work.
No.
Right. It's like the conversations work.
Yeah.
And when you recognize too, that not everyone wants to have the same type of conversation. Where, obviously some people are very talkative and they're going to wear their heart in their sleeve and tell you everything. And then others are going to hold all of their personal information close to their chest.
Yeah.
And not want to reveal anything until trust is built up.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're a bad person. They're just different.
Yes.
Right. So all of this works in leadership as well, which we could save for another conversation. Yeah. But I think what you're really striking here is that this skill set of being able to have conversations with different people is going to lead to more sales.
Yeah.
Different types of people, being good at conversing with them. So you're very outgoing.
Yeah.
And basically I could ask you a question and just sit back and listen. Now, if you're a buyer, I'm just going to feed you all day with a question and let you just go.
Yeah.
Right. And so then at the end of the conversation, how would you feel typically?
Yeah. Well, so here's the funny part.
Okay.
It's interesting you asked that question, because that's actually very similar to when I'm coaching sales reps one-on-one, because we'll pull their calls up and have them listen back to them. It's like, how do you feel after listening to yourself? Oh, I feel like I'm a product expert. I know what I'm talking about. I'm like, but how much do you know about prospects that relates them to the product? Well, not that much. I'm like, exactly. And what's crazy is some of the best conversationalists I've ever met, they ask really good questions and they allow people to unfold. Like, one of the ways I try to coach sales reps to running a demo, for example. So when you share your screen, give a demonstration of the product you're trying to sell them or they're trying to buy from you, there's this statistic where it's like, oh, it's like a 70-30 blend of the rep only talks 30% of the time and the prospect 70% of the time. It's like, yeah, that's true in the first half, because you want to understand, you want to be a good conversationalist in the sense that you get a lot to listen for. You don't just talk about the weather and their puppies and stuff. It's intentional listening. I actually think you mentioned that in your book too, which is great. Oh, after I read your book, I was like, oh, there's so many similarities here. But it's the art of listening with intent. You're not just being a good listener, like, oh, like when you talk to your spouse and you're like, oh yeah, that sucks, I'm sorry. There's that side of it too. But it's like in sales and business and influence, it's like, I feel a good conversationalist, not just a good listener, is someone that listens with intent, not to speak as soon as you're done, but it's, how are they building on the conversation? How are you helping them articulate their version of their pain, so that way you can then help them solve it by putting your product in the verbiage and the language that they best understand. And so if, instead of jumping in after they answer your first question and you're like, oh, here's a product pitch, blah, 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 you just spew all over them. It's like, and then they're just kind of like, okay, how much does it cost? And salespeople think they're doing great. It's, how can you get to that depth and conversation with them to where you're able to understand how they're actually feeling because of the situation they're in? Because at the end of the day, now, if you can do that as a solopreneur and you can put that in writing, which is why it's really good to understand your avatar, which is why it's good to know that's you, because if you can put that in writing on your website and your marketing and your content, you get to tap into that emotional reason why people need to work with you. And then the whole process just becomes easier, because that becomes the reason why people buy. People don't buy because they can increase efficiencies in their processes or reduce expenses. I'm holding air quotes up on the video. They buy because what those efficiencies get them, but then what their life is going to be after that. So there's a lot to, go into that one, but it's the conversationalist side versus listening. It's like, there's an art to asking questions that are intentful to drive people in a certain direction that's going to help them. And then there's that side where you're literally just waiting for them to stop talking and then changing subjects.
Yeah. Well, like one of the things you mentioned, Duane, was this 70-30 split. I've heard of that, but
yeah,
a lot of this is where you have to think through it too much for it to be useful. Right? Where you're saying something along the lines in your own head, saying, am I doing 50% of the talking? Am I doing 70% of the talking? And I've never really looked at those numbers as to what they mean. You just want to have a conversation where the person across from you feels good.
Yeah.
Right? Where there's trust that's being built. Sometimes it may be 70%. I don't know. I've never held up a stopwatch to say, okay, so I went 30 seconds. You get to go 70 seconds. Now,
it's like a game of chess. We're just that thing.
So, but what I do want is that person to open up where they can, if that's their personality, and then share what is valuable to them, and then have this conversation that becomes very natural.
Yeah.
Now, I'm bringing all of that up for a specific reason, but unfortunately, I forgot why. But it had to do with, it had to do with presenting. And then you said it kind of gets flipped. I don't know if you said it like that, but you cannot present and not do any of the talking. Yeah. You have to talk when you're presenting, but there still should be engagement though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
100%. So where I feel people get confused is it's usually on either side. There's no happy medium with it. They either have to perfect their pitch and have these things memorized and get people to close based on some talk track that they were told to use. Car salesmen are the best at it because I feel like that's the most cliche overused one. And then there's the other side where it's like you never actually move into the presentation where all you're doing is just letting that person talk. But the key thing to remember, I don't believe there's a true golden happy medium there. It's what's best for the prospect. And one of the other cliche things or overstated things about sales is deliver value. Like, well, yeah, I got to know what they find valuable first.
Mhm.
Like, if you go straight into presentation mode and you're literally just fire hose the information to them, you're no better than a recorded video on a website. Like, you have to be the difference between that stuff. And the difference is the human element where you bring that curiosity and understand, because yes, you know about the product, they know about their problem. The goal is to have an equal exchange of information to where you're not only learning about their situation, but then you're able to connect the dots with them about what your service or your product can provide them. And so you have to have that balance up front to where they're talking more because you're just listening and helping them articulate their problem, getting them to speak it into the world, because then it becomes real. And like literally subconsciously, when you say it out loud, there's a different trigger that goes off in your mind, in your frontal lobe, that then makes it more tangible, more real. So that's one of the goals that you want to do, is you want them to actually verbalize their problems. I've been known to say on sales calls where I'll lead up a phrase where it's like, hey, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but help me understand X. And they'll go into it. And then I'm like, okay, it's real. It's there. You just validated that stuff. But then you get that information because when you do your presentation, you're literally showing things to that prospect based on what they said. You're showing them the most important, you're showing them based on what they told you using their verbiage, and then getting confirmation from them rather than trying to use slick closing tactics. So it's a dance. It's like the waltz. You have to do certain things in a certain motion so it doesn't look like this chunky, choppy conversation to where you're just trying to close somebody after every time they say something cool. Like, it's a relationship. It's all about
Right.
connecting with people, and each person's different.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I love it. It's the
Yeah.
relationship. And if
Yeah.
instead of thinking about always be closing,
Yeah.
it's, to me, it's always about the other person. It's
Yeah.
always serving, but it's the relationship really what
Mhm.
it comes down to. And you don't close relationships,
No.
right? So the relationship there is that you just help each other.
Yeah.
You know, it's just what is, you know, you think of a partnership or relationship, you don't think about, I'm going to take advantage of somebody. You just help.
Yeah. At
And
least you
that's
shouldn't.
really, yeah, exactly. Well, those relationships are not healthy,
Yeah.
right? So let's talk about the healthy relationships.
Yes. Yeah.
But anyway, this has been a blast. I know we could go on for hours because
yeah.
what you just brought up, I just said, oh, let's talk about that. You
Yeah.
know, it's like another shiny object here. But where can people find you, and who, let me ask you this question. Who should be looking for you and where can they find you?
A great question. So I work with primarily SaaS companies. So that's software as a service. I work with sales leaders in that space and founders. So first time founder and CEOs that are kind of getting into that founder led sales or just out of that. So I work with, my business is called Selling SaaS, and I have, my website, just duanedufault.com. You can go on right now. There's a couple of courses available to where if you're an account executive looking to get better at your demo, and there's more things to come from that. But then I've got my podcast too. Podcast is literally called Selling SaaS, where we have market leaders from marketing, sales, and we have product on there as well to kind of round off that whole process. But LinkedIn, anywhere on social media, just search my name. It's going to pop up. Either I'm most active on LinkedIn. I've dove into the whole Twitter thing and Instagram with the video stuff. Harry, you and I were talking about using different tools to get better at that. But anywhere on social media, you just search my name. I am trying to get better about YouTube, just doing the shorts and putting my podcast recordings on there regularly. So it's just a different place for people that can go and absorb the information. But anywhere social media, search the name, or just go to my website too. There's a bunch of different places you can get it. Wherever you like to absorb information is where you can find me.
You're everywhere.
I'm trying to be the omnipresent person. So that way, if you don't like one thing, you can get the information somewhere else, and maybe eventually I'll whittle it down. But I'm always trying to serve people better, so that way they can learn, they can absorb the information. Like, good example is why I put courses together. So the coursework that I put together, most online course creators, they'll do videos that are like an hour to 90 minutes long with a bunch of slides and all that stuff. I have more chapters in the course, but there's 7 to 10 minute videos. So it's easier to get through the topics. It's easier to go back to parts of the course if you need to, rather than trying to, search through an entire, hour long video. And so I try to make sure that people have the ability to get in there. Plus, I know us salespeople are a little myopic and short-sighted, so it's easy to lose our attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to put you in the show notes. We'll put all of this
Right.
what you said. We'll rewind for the last 5 minutes where we can find Duane, and I'll make sure those are in the show notes. So if you got to this point, look in the show notes. That's how you find Duane.
Yeah.
And it has been a blast. I love the energy. I felt like you're me a number of years ago. And so it's kind of fun to see some of the same things that you've said. Literally. I mean, that's the beauty of the human language. But enough of me. Thank you so much for listening in, and for you joining me, Duane. It's been a real special treat.
Yeah, Aaron, it's been a blast. I appreciate you.
All right, my friend. Good stuff.